base 41b, just all the way at the bottom. The Gemara we did yesterday, we did a nice large piece of Gemara yesterday, starting from 41a. And we had the Mishnah, which talked about the mitzvah of shaking the lulav either on the first day only or on all 7 days. We had Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana that after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, they would shake the lulav. The mitzvah, he made a decree that everyone should shake the lulav all 7 days, not only in the Beis Hamikdash, but everywhere. And we spoke about the Rambam's opinion that it could be, the simple understanding of the Rambam, simple reading of the Rambam is that in Yerushalayim, even not in the Beis Hamikdash, in Yerushalayim, the mitzvah was to shake the lulav all 7 days. And we mentioned that there seems to be a number of problems with learning that way, different questions that could be asked. The simplest question was that the Mishnah says he made a whole decree about that when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, so he made a Zecher LaMikdash, commemoration for the Mikdash. He wants everyone to shake the lulav 7 days. And that's what we do. But the thing is, if they do that in Yerushalayim, so what type of a Zecher LaMikdash is it? Why do we need a Zecher LaMikdash? We even have it now. We don't need a commemoration for the Beis Hamikdash. We have it now. We could go to Yerushalayim and shake it. The holiness of Yerushalayim stayed. And so there's a whole discussion about the Rambam. You know, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Rambam's book, the Sefer or Sifrei HaRambam, and the opinions of the Rambam are the most discussed topics, discussions in the entire Jewish literature. In the world of Jewish literature, the Rambam has the most commentaries on it. It's really unbelievable how the Rambam merited to have everyone trying to figure out and expound on his halacha and on his interpretations. But here, it's not really on his in his code of law. It's more on his commentary on the Mishnayos, and this is what they're discussing. To the extent that the discussion has very extreme views, that the Igros Moshe we quoted said it can't be that the Rambam really explained this way. It must be a mistake in the print. It has to be. Now, David had brought a note, showed us a note from the Koran edition about the source of the Rambam could be the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. And it mentioned there, in the Jerusalem Talmud, it does seem to say Yerushalayim. And of course, it is a topic of discussion. Does the Talmud Yerushalmi, does that mean it literally Yerushalayim, or does it really just mean the Beis Hamikdash? And it says Yerushalayim because the people of Yerushalayim would go to the Beis Hamikdash in order to be able to fulfill this mitzvah of shaking the lulav. So if you take the Yerushalmi literally, then there could be a source for the Rambam that you would shake the lulav in Yerushalayim all 7 days, even though it's not in the Beis Hamikdash. Again, you'd have to take the Yerushalmi literally, and interestingly enough, the Igros Moshe that we quoted Rav Moshe Feinstein's Halacha Sefer, where it's brought in his 8th volume. It brings this thing where he says that the Rambam's opinion must be a mistake. He doesn't even quote the Yerushalmi, probably because the simple understanding of the Yerushalmi is not that it means it literally, that the Yerushalayim is you would shake the lulav 7 days all over Yerushalayim. It would mean the people of Yerushalayim would shake the lulav because they would go to the Beis Hamikdash and shake it. Or when it says Yerushalayim, it's referring to the Beis Hamikdash there. But you could learn it that way, I guess. It does say Yerushalayim, and to say that the Rambam maybe used that as a source, I see with it's possible to learn that way. Some of the commentaries want to say that's maybe the Rambam source. So again, there's a big discussion about this opinion of the Rambam, and as I mentioned, that it does have halachic ramifications in Yerushalayim. If you want to shake lulav, fulfill the mitzvah properly, you've got to fulfill it on the biblical level, not on a rabbinic level, all the days of Sukkot, not only on the first day or the second day. Now, so that's the Rambam that I finally looked up, the Yerushalmi and the Igros Moshe. I told you I would look into that, so I checked it up. The Gemara the Gemara on this Mishnah. So the Gemara had initially said that how do you know you're even supposed to do a Zeichel Hamikdash? The Gemara brought a source in a pasuk that we learned yesterday, and I think we reviewed it already yesterday. And the next Gemara was that the Yom Hanef is completely prohibited to eat from the Chadash, from the new grain. And this was on 41a. And the question was, the question that the Gemara dealt with was, what exactly are we concerned about? Why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai make this decree about the Yom Hanef, this day of the waving of the Yomer, the sacrifice of the barley that was brought on the 16th day of Nisan? That whole day is prohibited to have any of the new grain. You have to wait until the night of the 17th. And then you'd be finally allowed to have it. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, after they brought the Yomer on the 16th day, you're already permitted to have it. And if you didn't know if they brought the sacrifice yet, you could wait till midday. And then once midday kicked in, you would be allowed to eat the new grain because we assume that they brought the sacrifice. But after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, the halacha should be, you should be allowed to eat from the morning. But because I'm afraid, and I hope, that the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt soon, and in case the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt soon, you really have to wait until the sacrifice of the barley is brought, and you would not be allowed from the morning to eat the new grain. Therefore, I don't want you to make a mistake. And the Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt. Then you're going to say, well, last year we ate right in the morning. And therefore, I say the whole day is prohibited until the 7th, till the night. You have to wait until the night. And the Gemara goes through, well, what exactly are we worried about? Why? Well, at least you should have until from midday. Why do you have to prohibit the whole day? That's the one of the questions the Gemara finally asks. It says, at least from midday, we know the Gemara's answer is that we're afraid that the Beis Hamikdash was just built. It was just built, and if it was just built, then it's going to be, if the Beis Hamikdash is just built, then it takes time till they do the omer and all the grinding and the sifting, and they had to roast it and let any liquid drip out and so on. And it was a whole process. We're afraid maybe it'll take till after midday. So if the Beis Hamikdash was just built on the 15th before Shkia, or at the night of the 16th before the morning, in that case, it might take till after midday. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, wait till the night. Wait until the night before you don't eat at all the chadash, the new grain, until the night of the night before the 17th. And that was Rabbi Yochanan's decree. And that was the first two explanations. Either it was on the 15th before Shkia, or on the 16th after Shkia, after Tzeis, or at night before the morning. Those are the two options. Then the Gemara has a third answer to the discussion. And that is that there is an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that we're aware of. Rabbi Yehuda holds that biblically you're not allowed to have the new grain until the end of the day. It's a biblical law, not the way we understood Rabbi Yochanan until now, that it was a rabbinic law. It's really a biblical law, and the biblical law is learned from, because it says ad etam hayom hazeh, and we learn that it means until this entire day, and until means until and including. And if you follow that way of thinking, of understanding that the word until means until and including, it's like through. Through means including, right? Until would be, we think of until, but the word through, thru, would mean, I think means like until and including. And if that's that's the way this debate, we've seen this before about when it talked about until when can you say the Shema in the morning, or say daven the Shemona Esrei. Is it until and including? Until the fourth hour means until and including the fourth hour. And that was a Gemara in Brachas. So here we have Rabbi Yehuda, who says that ad v'ad b'chlal, and it could be that Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara's understanding that maybe Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and if that's so, this is the way Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok understands in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok holds that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai follows the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, and he didn't make a decree. He says that's the halacha. He's saying, not really decreeing that this is not a rabbinic decree. It means hiskin means darash v'hiskin. He darshan the pasuk this way, that when it says until, it means until and including, and therefore he established this, that that you have to be more careful than in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you had from midday, because you went by when the carbon was brought. But when there's no Beis Hamikdash, you have to go until Etzem Hayom Hazeh, which the pasuk says. That pasuk is referring to when there's no Beis Hamikdash, because the other pasuk says Ad Haviach, until you bring the sacrifice. And this pasuk says until the day, and until means until and including. And if so, you have to wait until the end of the day biblically. And if it's a biblical law, then there's nothing to talk about. If it was a rabbinic law, you could start asking questions. Well, why this and not that? Why do you make a decree? What's wrong with midday? At least they probably brought it. You're making a biblical decree. The biblical decree shouldn't be a problem. But if it's a biblical law, we understand it's the whole day. That's what it says. Biblically, that's the law. That's the law. There's nothing to talk about. The rabbis didn't decide this law. This is a law that they understood from the Torah. This is a Torah law. And the Torah law prohibits having the chadash, the new grain, until the end of the 16th day. Okay, so that basically leads us right into the Mishnah. And the Mishnah spoke about that, it mentioned the case where if Shabbos fell on the first day of Sukkot, what do you do? What do you do if Shabbos falls on the first day? So the of course doesn't apply today. We don't shake the lulav on Shabbos today, but we'll talk about that later. It's going to be brought up in the Gemara, Mishnah and Gemara. But at this point, we're dealing with, according to the letter of the law, we're supposed to shake the lulav on all the days of Sukkot. So if the first day falls on Shabbos, so they would bring the lulav to the shul beforehand, and then everyone would have to find their own. Why? Why'd they have to find their own? Because you cannot fulfill the mitzvah with your friend's lulav. That's on the first day. The other days of Sukkot, you could fulfill the mitzvah with your friends. It doesn't have to be shaloi. It doesn't have to be yours. But on the first day, it's gotta be yours. So Rabbi Yossi then says a halacha that if a person brought the lulav into the public domain, which is normally a prohibition, a biblical prohibition, it is a biblical prohibition to bring the lulav, carry it on Shabbos. And what he did was he brought it into the public domain on Shabbos, but he did it because he was so worried about fulfilling the mitzvah, so he did it by mistake. Normally he should bring a sacrifice in that case because it is a shoygig, it is a mistake, but it's a mistake that he did in order to do a mitzvah. So it wasn't a regular mistake. When you make a mistake, you forgot it's Shabbos and you turned on the light. Okay, that's a shoygig, made a mistake. But what about mistake to do a mitzvah? Here you're carrying your lulav. You're doing it, because you're so torrid and you're so concerned about the mitzvah. Rabbi Yossi says, guess what? You don't even have to bring a sacrifice. Normally, you'd have to bring a sacrifice, korban chatos. But here, you don't even have to bring a korban. You're exempt from a korban. This is Rabbi Yossi's statement in the Mishnah. Tomorrow we'll talk about it. And you were torud, you were busy because of a mitzvah. You were confused. You were overwhelmed because of the mitzvah. So you're exempt from bringing a korban. The Gemara says, how do we know that every person needs to have their own lulav? You can't fulfill the mitzvah with someone else's. The Gemara said it's because it says ulakachtem. We're on 41b right after the Mishnah. I'm just going over what we learned yesterday. Continuing, it's a long piece that we learned yesterday. So the Gemara that explains the Mishnah, the Gemara says, so how do you know that you need to own your lulav? How do you know it has to be yours? It says, ulakachtem. Lakachtem, plural, it should be that you should take. And the understanding is that every person should take their own lulav. And so it says lekachtem lekicha biyad kol echad. The lekicha biyad kol echad biyachad. Each person should take. Excuse me. That doesn't tell you it's your own. That means each person is obligated in taking. And it says lochem misha lochem. It has to be your own. So first it says lekicha lekol echad, that the community, every person, is obligated in doing the mitzvah of lulav. And then lochem tells you it has to be your own. And what does it mean it has to be your own? It can't be borrowed, and it can't be stolen. And here the rabbi said you can't fulfill the mitzvah on the first day of Sukkot with your friend's lulav unless he gives it to you as a gift. It has to be given to you as a gift. Now, we've talked about this before, but there is an important discussion, and that is that the ideal way of doing the lulav, at least on the first day and outside of Israel on the first and second day, is to give it as a gift. Matana almanas la'achzi. You have to say those words. It's a gift on the condition that you return it. In this way, the person who you give it to actually owns it. What happens if you did not say that and you just gave it to the person? Or I'll give you another example. You've got a big line, a group of a large amount of people, and they're not, necessarily so knowledgeable in the laws of lulav. And you're in a rush, and you're going to let them each say the bracha and shake it. Now, do you need to tell every single individual, it's about tana manas lachzir, I'm giving it to you as a gift in order that you return it? And then you might have to explain it. What gift? What did you say? Do you have to say that whole thing? Or can you get away with just giving them the lulav? So the Mishnah Brura brings down in chapter 658, Taf Reish Nun Ches, 658. The Mishnah Brura brings down that that the Magen Avraham says, he brings down an argument. He says the Magen Avraham proves that just like with regard to marriage, there's a law that if you borrow a vessel from your friend, let's say you borrow a ring from your friend, in order to consecrate a woman to marry a woman, and you're Mekadesh and Isha with this. So the law is she is Mikudeshes. Now you borrowed it from your friend. You're Mekadesh and Isha, you're Mekadesh, you're sanctifying a woman, marrying a woman with this. So the law is that it works because we assume that he gave it to him as a matana almanas lahachzir. He gave it to him as a gift on the condition that he returns it in order for him to be able to marry this woman. And maybe in the olden days, this was more common. You needed the ring right away. The woman was traveling later. And if you didn't finalize it, who knows if she was going to, the marriage was going to take place. In the olden days, you didn't have the accessibility as today. Anyway, so when you when you lend it to someone, we assume that you meant that. So can we assume the same thing here also? That when you give it to him, we assume you meant as a matana manas lahachzir. Is that good enough? So the Magen Avram says that that's good enough. And he brings also the Beis Shmuel, says the same thing. However, the Taz argues, and he says you are not yotzeh unless you say it. So it's a machlokes really among the achronim if you have to say it or not, which
Rabbi,
basically means that if you're in a major rush, you want to rely on the Magen Avram, if you don't have a choice, there is an opinion to rely on. Now,
Rabbi, I have a problem with that
yes.
because it's a contradiction in terms. Matana means you give it to somebody, stam, and that's it. It's theirs. It's a gift. Leman lachzir basically says, no, it's not a gift. You have to give it back to me. So it's a contradiction in terms. Maybe it's great for, here, but when you say that to somebody else, he's going to say, how can it be a gift when I have to return it back to you? You understand my point?
Well, you're sort of saying that it seems like a loophole, and it seems like it's not really real. It's not a real gift, because if you have to give it back, then it's not yours. And what we're understanding in Torah is that there is a concept of a gift that you own it, you're the full-fledged owner, but time limits that, and that it is limited by a certain time. You could be considered the owner, but it's fully yours, but that's limited to time, and the time does, at a certain time it will not be yours anymore. There is such a concept in Torah, meaning that's it deserves to be, looked into. You're right. Logically, you could question that and say maybe we shouldn't consider that yours. Torah does. Torah accepts that to be considered that it's yours, even though it's for a limited amount of time. It's still considered yours. I guess Jeffrey wants to add some spice to that.
I would. I think that the category is to fulfill a mitzvah. So when you are not there, for example, we discussed if your talis and tefillin are in shul and somebody comes there and it's not the time of the minyan, you're not there, we understand that you would want to help the person fulfill the mitzvah. So even without asking you, the person could use the talis and tefillin. He's, of course, he's not going to take it. It's similar in the sense it's an important mitzvah you're trying to do. So we try to extend the possibilities to make sure that it gets done.
Why can't you just give it to him as a matana? And his understanding is that he has to return it to you as a matana.
But
without having to say leman lachzir. To say that, to me, it's sort of like it's really not a matana.
Well, I think that anything that helps you to understand what the situation is very, very welcome, right? Yeah. You could leave a sign on your talus bag and say, you know, anybody who comes and wants to use this is permitted to do that. But it's not like they describe here. It's a crowd of people. They were coming to the Beis Hamikdash, or they were coming to the synagogue in the ancient times. There's a crowd of people, and they all brought their lulavim before the Yontif, right? Because it's going to be on Shabbos. So they all brought them there, and you have a pile of them, okay? And everybody was not necessarily going to be able to think beforehand that he has a mark on his so that it will be useful to recognize. Everybody didn't have a chance to do this. Hard enough to run there in time to bring it before Shabbos, so it'll be there for the next day. So if you make it very difficult for people, then they're not going to fulfill the mitzvah. So you try to explain it as best you can, and they're going to have this. They're going to discuss this now. So you want to overcome the circumstances that are, you know, uncomfortable.
You know, I do have to just mention something. The Shulchan Aruch says it a little differently than I said it, and I'll tell you why. The Shulchan Aruch says that a person can't fulfill the mitzvah on the first day of Sukkot with the lulav of his friends that he lent him, because it has to be yours, lachem, which means shalachem. And even if he says it should be yours until you fulfill the mitzvah with it, and afterwards it'll be mine, like it was originally, he doesn't fulfill the mitzvah if he says that. He says it should be yours until you fulfill the mitzvah, and afterwards it'll be mine. He's not fulfilling the mitzvah because that's like lending. But if he gives it as a gift, then it works. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, and he says, it has to be yours. And he says that this is like lending, because the Ein Zeh Lashon Matana doesn't sound like it's a gift, because he's clarifying, he's piresh, he's explaining shehu rak lizman, that it's only for a certain time, which makes it sound like the explanation that I mentioned earlier is not precise, is not correct. Because if you say it's a gift for time, that's a problem. If you say it's a gift until you give it back to me, that's okay. So you can't really say it as a gift for time, because then it makes it sound that actually is also a problem. If you say it's limited to a certain time, it's like fulfill the mitzvah and you can have it while you fulfill the mitzvah, and then you give it back to me, and that sounds like lending. But if so a gift for time sounds like lending. But if it's done in a way that it's a gift until you give it back, that's considered a matana. So you didn't say that like it's for a certain time. You just said it's yours, but you have to give it back. That's okay. Now, it's obviously this is not the normal case. Normally, people buy their own lavim and esrogim, and that you fulfill the mitzvah properly like that. This is in a situation. Is this allowed? Yes. Is this acceptable? Yep. It's called a matana. According to halacha, this is called a gift. But it does bring about a number of questions. What happens if you didn't say this? And so we just saw in the Mishnah Berurah about these shilas. If you didn't actually tell it to the person, matana manas lahachzir, would that be good enough? Another issue is it yours if you gave a check and the check wasn't cashed yet? If you bought it from the store and you put it on, you told him you're going to pay him after Yom Tov. This is all these type of questions are discussed. Is that appropriate? Because it's not really yours only rabbinically if you're going to pay him later. So you want to be fulfilling the mitzvah biblically, and so maybe if you bring it into your reshus, so then it's not. Then it's okay. But the best is if you pay for it when you take the lulav. Now, what about borrowing? Your wife is home and someone comes and they want to shake lulav. Can they shake lulav? And can your wife give them your lulav? This is another issue because it's not exactly hers. It's really yours. and it's even a question if she can shake it, because whatever she owns is really like you own, and so that itself is a discussion about her shaking your lulav. So these are issues. Of course, the ideal way to have to fulfill the mitzvah is for you to borrow it from the husband who owns it. That would be the ideal way to fulfill the mitzvah.
When you're buying it, if you pay with cash, that's
Yeah.
one thing. But if you pay
Yeah.
for check, the check
Right.
is like I'll pay you later. Then it's not yours.
Right. That could be a problem, especially if they didn't cash the check. Yeah.
What about
Yes, Jeffrey.
I've seen the rabbi ask the chassan under the chuppah
Right.
if the ring belongs to him.
To
Right.
him.
And he said, yes. And then the rabbi said, and did you pay for it? And he said, I used my credit card.
Uh-huh.
Right. So that also brought an issue. But maybe we could learn something else from the position. Maybe the position of this mission is here because we just studied about the lulav and the esrog during the shvius. We also had to go through a procedure, right? That you have to say, I'm paying you for the lulav, the general price, and you're going to give me the esrog as a matana. And the various choices of how to do that. Maybe that's why this is positioned here with this. We could have discussed this earlier, but some of it we discussed earlier. Because there are the procedures that are trying to correct complicated situations, and everybody doesn't necessarily have the wherewithal to just go out and buy all the things that they.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess it fits right in. You're talking about giving it as a gift.
Right.
Now
Exactly.
we're talking about using someone else's, give it as a gift. Right. Okay. It does fit in there. Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
on the
Yes.
first
Yes,
day
Ezra.
on the first day of Sukkot, actually it's for all the days, but the first day is probably the most problematic one. Say, if my wife wants to shake the lulav, so how do I go about it so that it is hers, so that she can fulfill the mitzvah?
So seemingly the by saying the matana almanas lahachzir, that formula works also for your wife. I'd have to look up and see if every single opinion agrees with that, but that's the common minhag, at least, and that's the accepted way of doing it. That you should say it. In other words, don't just because it's in your house and we assume and so on. It really should be done in a way that it's matana al manas lahachzir.
Can you give it to her as a matana, and then have her give it back as a matana?
Yeah, exactly.
Without saying that statement. Okay, this is
right.
I'm giving it to you as a gift.
Matana. So in Shulchan Aruch it says that if you gave it to the person without stipulating almanas lahachzir, it's as if you said almanas lahachzir, because that's what we assume, because he needs to fulfill them. Because we assume that's what he meant, and therefore you always have to give it back. Now, why do we specifically say matana almanas lahachzir? So there is I have to look it up, but there is such a thing that on Yontiv, it's a gift for mitzvah purposes. And if you just give it as a gift, maybe that could be problematic. I have to look up and see if this is correct. But it could be that you specifically want to say matana almanas lahachzir, because otherwise giving the gift on Yontiv maybe could be a problem of being makna. I'm not sure if this is correct, but again, it would be something to look into. Shulchan Aruch mentions that if you didn't say matana almanas lahachzir, you just say matana, you actually assume that it means matana almanas lahachzir. So I know you're trying to make it more of a gift, and you're trying to fulfill the mitzvah more in a more real way of that it's
With
a
that-
real gift and so
with that
on. But I'm
condition.
questioning if maybe that sort of like is instead of being better, maybe it's worse. You know, I have to look it up because I have to look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. I know he says such a line there, and I just want to double check it. But we'll check that out. Yes, David.
Husband and wife aren't they considered like one unit?
Yeah,
Like
but
when you get
right,
when you get a lulav and esrog, you get one for each of your kids.
right.
You don't get one for your wife because she's separate. You know what I'm saying?
You don't get her because she's one with you. That's why you don't get
Yeah,
her one.
I'm
I
asking.
don't think that's the reason. The reason you don't get her one is because women are not obligated in mitzvah of lulav, but they fulfill the mitzvah, and it's not an inyan for them to. I mean, it's very rare to find women shaking the lulav during Hallel. They'll do the mitzvah, they shake it, and that's it. But to say it on Hallel, does she really need a lulav to shake it during Hallel and so on? Not really. So that's the main reason why you're not getting her a lulav. The men, they need to shake it during the davening. It's appropriate for them to have their own. The mitzvah for them. So that would be the reason why you're buying each of your members of your family, male members, a lulav. Now, if you're wondering if there's any heter, I mean, the problem is that partners are not able to fulfill the mitzvah, claiming, well, it's ours. No, it's actually not yours if you're a partner. So the fact that the husband and wife are one, I don't know that could be used as a heter. I'm pretty convinced that that's not the heter. The heter would be maybe the husband doesn't mind that the wife takes it as a gift. He has in mind that she could, that he's giving it to her as a gift. That would be more of the heter if the woman, is gonna fulfill the mitzvah with it, But especially we are familiar with the Hayyimim that says that you should give it to, when you should specifically say matana manas lahachzir to everyone, that which implies even when it's your wife and your children and so on. It seems that that's the tradition to actually say matana manas lahachzir.
I'd be very surprised if men are saying this to their wives when their wives are benching lulav and esrog. Do you think that's what's the more common thing?
Yeah, I would think that's the common thing.
Is that they say to their wives, "This is a matana."
I think so. I say it to my wife. Yeah.
No kidding. Okay. I stand corrected.
I'm not saying that there's no heter. To look up and find that there might be some heter, because the husband obviously would give it as a gift to her and so on, and it's as if he said it, um, um, but definitely that's the ideal, and definitely based on the here. Mishnah Berurah Sivkat Ches over here. Let's see. Mishnah Berurah talks about the wife giving it away. What is this? Wrong one. If the husband's not home and the wife gives the lulav to one of his friends with a matana, the friend does not fulfill the mitzvah because maybe he would rather sell it to the person. Unless it's unless the owner is a very hush of a person, then we can assume that Nechale, Bikuri Yaakov questions this because we always say Nechale, that a person wants a mitzvah to be done, and this doesn't work on the first day of Sukkot, so she has no right to take his lulav. Even if she heard that the husband afterwards didn't mind, too bad. When at the time that she gave it to the guy to shake, it wasn't his, and he should go and shake again. And regarding the bracha, it seems to be questionable, but the person who got it from the wife should shake again, which makes it sound like it's not the wife. She is not the owner. That sort of adds a little steam to my claim that it's The woman is not the owner. B'yom rishon. Oh, here I see in the Piskei Teshuvos, he says on the first day, tzarech habal, the husband needs to. He spells it out very clearly from the Bikurei Yaakov. Tzarech habal losses lahalula matana manas lahachzir. The husband has to tell his wife. This is clearly in the Bikurei Yaakov brings. They bring from the Bikurei Yaakov the Piskei Teshuvos. Now, some write that it's mistaber, that since she's smucha, he al shulchan, on her husband's table and the kids, the saimach. So if so, they could be, we call it lochem, maybe. But tzarech ian gadol, if you could rely on this, he says. Tzarech ian gadol. It's a big wonder if you could rely on this type of a heter. It brings some type of heter from the Aruch HaShulchan. Anyway, so that's the that sort of there definitely is reason to say Bantana Manas Lahachzir. Okay, so so this is a topic of discussion here. Taisus over here talks about the esrog of shutfim, and talks about, let's say, brothers inherited property. They inherited estate. Excuse me, the estate, and the estate had esrogim on it. So the question is, can they just use the esrogim from the estate? And the answer is no. It's not theirs. It's not miyuchad for them. It's like they're like borrowers. And he says, and Taisus says this, that the community has a communal lulav. That's not a partnership. He says because every person is taught that they are giving their portion to their friend in order and on the condition that he returns it. And that's how they're buying the lulav. They bought it on the condition to fulfill the mitzvah. And even though they don't say it, it's stama de milsa, it's as if they're saying matana manas lahachzir, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to fulfill the mitzvah. So this Taisvis, this is the second Taisvis on page 41b. This Taisvis does give us a little implication that the same thing should apply if, let's say, you're in a rush and you have many people, you're shaking with a lot of people, and you don't actually use the words matana manas lahachzir, that maybe you could say stama de milsa, that it's assumable that it's as if you said it, because otherwise they won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah. In all the cases that it talks about that you need to say it, or if you borrowed it, you weren't yaitza, that's when you use specifically the words, I'm lending it to you. You specifically say you're lending it, or if the guy who's lending it doesn't know that he's supposed to give it as a gift. But if you know you're supposed to give it as a gift, you just didn't say the words. So then this Taisa seems to be seems to be leaning towards the concept of we stama de milsa, that it's assumable that you could rely on such a assumption that it's being given as a matana manas lahachzir.
Question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's assume that you're when you say it like that, that means, let's say you have a line of people waiting to use your lulav because you're the only one in shul that's left and people need to make the bracha. So when you give it to the first guy and you say it to him, he then has to return it back to you. He can't give it to the next guy.
Uh-huh.
You understand?
Yeah. Now, that's a good question.
You have to stay there for the entire group, and each one of them has to return it back to you so that you can then give it to the next guy.
Yeah, so yesterday, that really leads us to the next part of the Gemara, which we did learn yesterday, and that is that what's the story with Rabbi Gamliel, that he paid this crazy sum of money for a lulav, for a lulav. He bought it for 1,000 zuz. They were on a boat, they were on a ship, and what happened over there? Rabbi Gamliel shook with it, and he fulfilled the mitzvah. He gave it to Rabbi Yeshua as a gift. Rabbi Yeshua took it, he fulfilled the mitzvah. He gave it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah as a gift. Rabbi ben Azariah took it, he gave it to Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva took it, and he returned it to Rabbi Gamliel. So the famous question on this story is, didn't he have to return it to Rabbi? Didn't each of them have to return it to Rabbi Gamliel? Right. That's the question. That l'chayra they gave it as a matana, and they only returned it at the end. Why didn't they each return it to Rebbe Gamliel? And
But
now,
that supports what I
right.
said, which means that he gave it as a regular matana, and he finished it. He gave it to the
Right.
other guy as a matana. He finished it, kept on going until the last person, who then turned around and gave it back as a matana to Rabbi Gamliel.
Right. So the thing is, Taisus asks this question, and Taisus on the second to bottom Taisus, he says, this that Rabbi Yeshua did not return it to Rabbi Gamliel, but rather gave it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Gamliel's intention was sheyetu kulam, that they should all fulfill it, and afterwards yachziruhu. So, in other words, what he's saying is that this was like his intent, that they are meant to fulfill it. In other words, he's following his same line of thought, that it's like he said, Al manas lahachzir, when you finish. When you all, for each of you, it's a matana to you, and it's a matana to you, and and ultimately it's Al manas lahachzir at the end. So so that's the the understanding also is that it's as if he told each of them matana manas lahachzir, even if you return it a little later. In other words, like the fact that it ultimately was returned to him right afterwards made it as if this matana manas lahachzir works. In other words, that you fulfilled matana manas lahachzir. So even though you didn't actually do it, so this is okay. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch. I did see it there. This discussion of you really should return it. Give it. You gave it to him, and he gave it to the next person. Umiu afilu layachziru liyad. Even if you didn't return it, this is the Shulchan Aruch here. It says, however, even if he didn't return it to his hand, but rather to another person, the other person gave it to another person. In the end, he returned it. It's yatsa. You fulfilled the mitzvah. The Mishnah adds in that, by the way, make sure not to, if the guy tells you don't give it to anyone else, that's a problem. But otherwise, yeah, that's fine. You give it to him, he gave it to another person, because ultimately you're giving it to that person as a gift that it has to be returned to you, but you don't need to return this moment. Return it in 5 minutes. So he gives it to the next person as a matana manas lahachzir. Each person has the right to give it as a gift to the other person on the condition that it ultimately gets back. So in other words, if each person is giving it as a matana manas lahachzir, in other words, you gave it to Yankel. Yankel gives it as he owns it. He's giving it as a gift to Shmerel. Shmerel is now he got a gift from Yankel, not from you. He got a gift from, and ultimately he returns it to you. It's fine. That's fulfilling the mitzvah. And that you sort of see from this story that it's considered acceptable, and each one gave it as a gift. But ultimately, their thing is, it's matana manas lahachzir. It's as if they said it. Okay. Let's continue over here. So we have the story of this Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and the Gemara says, why does it mention in the end that they gave it back to Rabbi Gamliel? We see that you need to own it. That you see from the story. Why? Because each of them gave it. He bought it for 1,000 zuz, and he gave it b'matana each one gave it to the next one bimatona as a gift. And so what does it mean that why does it mention that he returned it at the end? So the Gemara says, because when you say matana amanas lahachzir, which the Gemara understands that he for sure meant almanas lahachzir when he gave it, right? So when you give it as almanas lahachzir, it's still considered a gift. It's called lachem. You fulfill the mitzvah. It's not a problem. You own it at that time. It's called lakachtem lachem. And we learned that this applies to the whole Torah. And matana manas lahachzir, it's considered yours. And as long as you return it afterwards, you fulfill the mitzvah. So that is acceptable. Now, so that's what the Gemara understands from this, from this story. Now, what happens if you don't return it? That's a problem.
Hey, that's what I was about to ask you.
Yeah.
What happens
if it gets damaged? What happens if it falls? The pitum breaks off. An inus happens. So if they don't return it, then there's a big problem. You have to go shake with another lulav because you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of you didn't own it at the time. That's the problem. You didn't own it at the time. So if something wrong happens, make sure to borrow from someone else. Make sure to get a gift from someone else, the lulav, because this lulav you did not fulfill the mitzvah with, because it was given to you as a condition that you return it. And now you can't return it. It got stolen. It got lost. It got someone. Someone took a bite out of it.
But how about everybody along the way? It was eventually not returned.
Right. All the people along the way did not fulfill the mitzvah. They would need to get another lulav to shake with. It doesn't help afterwards. He says, "Oh, I don't mind," because at the time he did mind. He said, "Amanas lachzir." So even though afterwards he says, "You know what? You owned it at the time." No, it doesn't work that way. At the time, you didn't own it. You owned it only if it ended up getting back to him in one piece. So that doesn't work. Okay. So then the Gemara continued and mentioned why does it mention that he bought it for such a huge amount of money? And the David told us yesterday that that's 8 months of salary is 1,000 zuz. And the thing is, it shows us how much mitzvahs were chaviv on, that he was willing to pay such a huge amount to fulfill the mitzvah. Which of course leads us to a question of, is there any maximum amount that if a person's stuck on a boat, it's Sukkah, doesn't have a lulav, and someone has one, and they refuse to let him use it, and they're only selling it to him if he gives $500,000. They give him his house. Would you be obligated to sell your house, to give him your house in order to fulfill? Is there a limit, an obligation, for a positive mitzvah? To fulfill a positive mitzvah, what is the maximum amount a person would be obligated in paying if he's getting ripped off and forced into this? But from the Gemara, it sounds like there is a maximum amount, because he didn't really have to spend $1,000, 1,000 zuz. In this case, 1,000 zuz, 8 months salary is what we understood. That he didn't have to do that, and it shows how much chaviv the mitzvah is. That he was, in other words, the other rabbis didn't do it not because they didn't feel obligated to. They didn't have that money. 8 months. Who has 8 months of salary in your saved up in your savings? It's not in those days, especially. It wasn't common. You lived a dollar to penny, day by day. But Reb Gamliel was wealthy, so he had money. So he was able to do that. Or maybe or even if they had money, they didn't have money on them. Gamliel had money on them, so he paid 1,000. But it does say that it shows that how much chavivus the mitzvah was. It sounds like al pi halacha, maybe he would not have been obligated to fulfill the mitzvah. He could have considered himself an oinus, could have considered himself he has no choice, and maybe there is a limit. We'll have to take a look in your day of what the how this works. I believe that there's no limit for a negative, to transgress a negative mitzvah. You have to give your whole life savings. But to fulfill a positive mitzvah, I believe there is maybe a something we have to look into now. There is possible, because the Gemara says to show how chaviv the mitzvah is. That doesn't show how chaviv. It shows you're obligated to. If he's obligated to, it doesn't really show that the mitzvah was chaviv. It would just show that he did what he was supposed to, and that's not it would show that you're obligated to give your whole life savings to fulfill a mitzvah, positive mitzvah. It reminds me of the story where the Gemara mentions that one of the rabbis he made his eved, he freed his slave in order to make a minyan. Can you imagine freeing a slave? Who knows how much money a slave costs? That's a lifetime, not only lifetime, it's your children inherit your slave and so on. And he did that in order to fulfill a mitzvah of having a minyan. I mean, how careful are we to have a minyan? It's nice. We try to go to a minyan, but that he would be willing. That's talking about maybe, I don't know, $100,000, $1 million. How much is a slave? To be able to have a minyan. He did that, but so anyway, the Gemara here says, it shows how much mitzvahs were chaviv, that he was willing to spend 8 months' salary to be able to fulfill this mitzvah.